Welcome to the Driving Change podcast on the Evergreen Podcast Network, where we live at the intersection of neuroscience and storytelling. If you love great stories and you love understanding the mindset it takes to be a world-class change agent, then join us as our fascinating guests from all walks of life unpack their unique journeys of perseverance and passion, of expertise and experience, and be inspired to use your own story to drive change. Well, welcome back to the Driving Change podcast here as we're ending the year of 2024. I want you to think back to the beginning of 2024, like so many of us do. We probably set goals and milestones, and then at the end of the year, we try to review our year and see how we did. And well, we're no different here at the Driving Change podcast. And one of the things that we like to do is look back on some of the guests that we've had throughout the year and pick a handful of them that have a really nice theme for reflection. Now, we call this the Driving Change podcast for a reason, because we want to bring on guests that hopefully have an area of expertise as well as their life story that helps inspire you to think a little bit differently about your own life and some of the things that you can still accomplish with the gifts and talents that you have. So my question is what have you changed this year, and how have you benefited from it, and how have others benefited from that change? The first compilation we're going to put together for you is a little bit of an excerpt from the godfather of change, Dr. Richard Boyatzis. We were lucky enough to get him back on the show again this past year. And he is known for his work in so many different books in emotional intelligence and primal leadership. And he's got new books coming out this year as well. And he really, his intentional change theory and his expertise in emotional intelligence has changed a lot of the ways that we do things at Braintrust for our clients. And I think if you've not watched any of the episodes with him, I encourage you to go back and do so. In this particular clip, we talk a little bit about the work on emotional and social intelligence and how the foundation of that really kind of sets the framework for how we should approach everything. So as we think about where we've come from this year and where you're going next year, let's listen to Dr. Boyatzis talk about some of the areas that he's an expert in that might help you get there.
But it is true that in the spring of 1967 is when I started working on the early version of this theory, the intentional change theory. And the new book that you mentioned is an integration of 58 years of my work on how we pursue sustained desired change at all levels, from individual to country change.
So let's jump off there, because I think that a lot of times we bring in somebody like yourself. I love that I tease Dan a lot about this too, is that a lot of PhDs talk about everything has a theory at the end of it. Like, at some point, does anyone prove any of these things? I'm just kidding. We call everything a theory. But once you've proven it, is it no longer a theory? So explain intentional change theory in kind of layman's terms to folks.
Well, one of the principles is that sustained desired change. So I don't care what you do for a few weeks or a few months, what lasts for a year. And it has to be desired. Sustained desired change for individuals or couples or families or teams or organizations, communities, countries, does not happen in a smooth, linear way. It happens in discontinuities. And those discontinuities turn out to be, it's almost never a normal distribution. I published a paper a few years ago with a colleague, Uday Andar, showing that change is almost always a power curve, which means all of our assumptions about normal distributions just aren't real. And to appreciate that, you have to use complexity theory. And you have to be ready to adjust for the fact that people don't change in a smooth way. It's always got fits and starts. Second, using complexity theory, when you ask the question, when people engage in our achieving sustained desired change, are there moments of emergence or emergence into consciousness that are consistent when you study a lot of groups of people? And the answer to that is yes. One discovery is of your purpose, your vision. And in collectives, in teams, organizations, communities, it's what's the shared vision. Not goals, vision. It turns out neurologically is a huge difference. Vision, purpose, meaning. If you have that, you're eligible for the second, which is your real, what I call the real self. Now, it's not what you think of yourself, because that's delusional. The real self is, how do other people experience you? And that usually leads to a comparison, even unconsciously, to the ideal self. And you come up with a personal balance sheet, strengths, weaknesses. Then you have a learning agenda as the third discovery, which is something you would joyously want to be pursuing. As soon as you use the word should or have to, it's not. It's negative. But it's something you are really looking forward to. It's never a performance improvement plan. That's illusionary. And it usually is something that gets you closer to your vision, sometimes using your strengths. May or may not include working on a weakness. The fourth discovery is once you're on a path, practicing. And the fifth discovery are these caring relationships that enable you to move through all this. Now, what enables you to move through these different phases of change are what I call tipping points. And these are psychophysiological states that put you into a state where you're open to considering an alternative, what I call the positive emotional attractor, or the negative emotional attractor where you close down. That happens, again, individually, in teams, organizations, communities, countries. Lastly, because my theory, intentional change theory, many parts of which have been validated through many different research studies, as you mentioned, Jeff, but there are always parts of it that haven't been. And part of it is it's a fractal. So I believe the process of change at the country level, at the community level, is identical to what I'm talking about. But when you have a fractal theory at multiple levels, you have to have something that can move information, and I think among humans, emotion across the levels. And that's where the role of resonant leadership relationships become key, and social identity groups. Now, that's a bit more comprehensive and more abstract than to delve into, but suffice to say, you don't change at one level without changes happening at other levels. And very often when people try to change individually or team or organization, and they don't work on the multiple levels at the same time, the change is squelched. That's why part of it, why it's not sustainable.
You know, in our next clip, we had Andrew Barry come on, and I remember the conversation distinctly. And what I liked about Andrew is not just his expertise in storytelling, but what it takes to really transform ourselves and others, the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell others, and his idea of transformation and growth through identity and what that means to us. Let's take a listen to what Andrew has to say on that and see if that maybe gives you yet another spark into next year.
You know, this idea of identity has kind of always been ever present for me. And where I've reached in my own personal journey on that is that we are all ultimately fundamentally connected in some way. And that defines a lot. You talked about beliefs and values. It defines a lot of the work we do. I think we all have some ability to tap into a higher consciousness, a collective intelligence. We can channel that by getting in touch with our own unique ability and identity. And a lot of our work tries to bring that out into people. And I think that's where transformation comes from. And it's all best, I think, described in this concept that I learned from South Africa called Ubuntu. I don't know if have you heard about Ubuntu before?
Someone else was talking about that, but I don't remember exactly what it means.
It's really cool. And it's basically, Ubuntu basically means I am because you are, right? So like I don't have an identity in existence without you helping me bring that into, you know, by your perception of who I am and all that. And so that spirit is fundamental in the African culture. And I think it's rubbed off a lot on me. You know, we are better together. We all have different unique skills and abilities that we can bring to the table. And that's kind of what I've seen a lot in my work. I left South Africa 13 years ago. The other thing about South Africa is it's very small, and my identity was very much defined by who I was growing up. And coming to America, that was an opportunity. In America, I think it presents this opportunity over and over again, which is what I love about it, is you can totally reinvent that identity. And that's what I did. You know, I came here, I didn't know anyone. I knew one person. And I was basically able to start from scratch, which was amazing. I worked at KPMG at that time, so I was lucky in that sense to be able to come over with them. They sponsored my green card and eventually got citizenship and all that, essentially through that firm. But I was able to start from scratch, and I never would have started my business, Curious Lion, in South Africa. It's just like, and we can unpack that if you want, but it's not the right, it wasn't the right environment. I'm a very different person to who I am now. And I think my present self kind of has reshaped the narrative of my past self and those stories and those lessons and all that growing up. So yeah, I think that in a nutshell, that's that South African root, that Ubuntu, that collectiveness, that we're all connected in some way is there. But it's also married now with this ability to constantly reinvent. And I think I see that in people around me all the time. Like, we all have this insane potential that we, with a little bit of guidance, and this is where I think coaching conversations become so important, which I know you talk a lot about. With a bit of that guidance, the sky's the limit. Like, there's no telling what you can actually achieve. And I think coming to America taught me that as well.
So you said something there I think is pretty interesting. Is I've not heard it said that way before, that your present self has helped you reshape your past self. Tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I've known it implicitly. And then just recently I came across the work of Dr. Benjamin Hardy, where he made it explicit. And I was like, oh, that's what's happening. And it's essentially this idea that the past, the present, and the future all happens at the same time, essentially, right? Our experience of it. There's no past that is like behind us and we cannot access it anymore. Yes, there are events that happened in the past, but the stories that we tell ourselves, the narratives that we choose to believe, we have agency over that, right? And so we can, even with trauma, right? And his study kind of looks a lot at post-traumatic growth. Trauma can make or break someone, and it's not. I don't want to sound flippant here and say it's it's free agency and everyone can do this, but it takes a lot of work, obviously. But you can define what that story is. And I've certainly done that in my own life, looking at that upbringing and looking at it in new ways.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very wise way to think about. Some people are stuck. They say they're stuck in the past, or they live in the past, or they live in shame of their past, or there's a lot of things in their past that have really held them down from being able to be more, not only in their present, but then it limits their thinking in the future. So I like that we're all a part of the sum of our life's experiences, and we think about it sometimes as a progressive linear path. And once you've stepped past chapter 1 and you're on to chapter 2, well, chapter 1's in the rear view, but no, not really. You're saying that it's all threaded through into the past, present, and future, into what you would argue is all wrapped up into what's possible, right? What's potential.
Well, and so this future self as well, which I'll talk about for a sec, but I think that's why you asked that question to start your podcast, right? Because it's what our past does define who we are. But I think the thing that I've started to realize as I've gotten older is that we get to shape that narrative. If you're intentional about it, you can shape that narrative. It doesn't define you. It's not something that happens to you. It's something that you have agency over. And this applies equally to the future self, that concept of who we are. And I know the power of visualization, I'm sure it comes up a lot in your work. We use that a lot. That's a huge thing as well, to think about that whole thread, basically your origin story and your future self. And Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan talk about 10xing that, having something that seems so impossible that it defines that crazy 10x vision defines the present person you are now.
And one of my next favorite episodes that we had was Pat Del Medico come on, and Pat's a giant in the industry, in the world of insurance, as a leader, and he's really built his his career out of being an empathic leader. And sometimes it doesn't always come across in our culture that we're supposed to lead with vulnerability and lead with empathy. But he's a driving, competitive, successful leader who's been able to build organizations with those traits. So let's take a listen as Pat talks about transformation isn't just about ourselves, it's how we are able to connect and help others transform as well, and how empathy plays a meaningful part of our role in doing so. Let's listen to this clip with Pat.
I'm probably in my late 20s, early 30s, and it wasn't until then that I started to transition to it's about them. Everything we do, in my opinion, in life is about the other person. Like, how do you connect with them? And so I just started asking surgeons, what's your background? How did you get here? What are your needs? And in my previous life, I was all about, here's my product, right? And what I realized is we started pulling that layer back, I started connecting with these folks, right? On a totally different level than just a transaction. And I remember a couple of my sales reps saying, wow, that was really good. And I was thinking to myself, man, that was so simple. All I was doing was just asking somebody what they wanted and what they were about. So that's probably the one thing. I mean, if there was one sort of transition in life that I really made an impact on me, it was that. And then I started building on that from there.
What do you think it is that, obviously the listeners who know us well know we study this, right? The neuroscience of effective communication, what's going on between the ears when two people are engaged, whether it's in a sales conversation or a parent to child or a coaching conversation with an employee. Well, why do you think, because what you just said, everyone who's done any type of sales in the world that's listening just went, well, yeah, no doubt. That's a Geico commercial, Pat. Everybody knows that. But why is it, if everybody knows that very few do it? Why do you think that is?
I can tell you right now, I have a couple of folks that are younger people working for us that have said, this is sad, but they don't know how to care about it. Like, they don't, some people just don't care, right? But they also are fearful. I think they're fearful of being interesting versus just being interested. And I think that's the key, right? So many people say, oh yeah, I can do that. Well, why aren't you doing it, right? And I think they're not doing it because they're fearful that if I'm going to start to talk to Jeff, I've got to be like this superstar person. Even today, preparing for this or talking, my wife and I were listening to it, and I'm like, wow, you got people that write books and people that present to national audiences. And I'm like, I'm not that guy. But I started talking to you, and I want to be interested in how this all came about, right? And I started pulling back that layer as well. So I think it comes down to making sure that you understand that everybody you connect with has a passion to feel significant. And if you don't recognize that early, you miss an amazing opportunity for a connection that could potentially last you a lifestyle.
So let's go a little deeper into that topic, because it's been a while since we've talked about this on our show and with a guest specifically. But since you're out living this every day, we talk a lot about that the brain is built biologically for self-preservation. You can't help it. Its number one primary role and function is survival. And so you wake up every day in this self-preservation, risk mitigation mode. And as humans, we're bent toward the opposite. Our biology is almost built against us caring about someone else more than we care about ourselves. And so then when you're in a pressure situation and stress is elevated, you will communicate from your own highest level of training, knowledge, and self-preservation. So if you think about that, all of these things are pitted against us.
Right.
And yet the skill of being able to actually, because when you really peel the onion back on people, tell me if you disagree, but most people actually do care about other people. They really do.
Oh no, it's inherently there. They just don't know how to again make that connection. So many people we talk about are afraid of small talk. They don't value it. But I would argue to my team and friends, how did you make your best friends? Small talk, right? And then through that, what were you doing? You were asking about them. You were asking about their family. You were asking, where did they grow up? These are really simple things. To your point, like people are like, oh my gosh, I've heard this before. I'm like, well, do you put it to use and do you put it in practice daily?
What have you found are consistent formulas for whether it's something you're trying to do personally, whether you're helping, build a PTA rather in your local neighborhood, or coaching a kids soccer team, or building an organization, or for your family? Are there some formulas that you've come up with process wise? You're like, okay, this works. This is transferable.
Yeah. I think first and foremost, you got to be vulnerable. This is sort of the individual piece, right, of being a leader. Is I've implemented recently something that I think is really good, and I ask my top leaders that report to me. I often ask them, what am I doing? What do you want me to stop doing? What do you want me to start doing? And what do you want me to keep doing? And I think those are three, that's pretty vulnerable, right? And so if they give it back to you and you digest it and you don't argue with it, right? And it's powerful, right? So that's one thing that I know as a leader. The second thing is, as it relates to the people, I just go back to, again, everyone has a story, right? Everyone has a background, but everybody also has a trigger for what motivates them. And I encourage all of our people. You talked about empathy is not necessarily a strength, right? But you're working on it. I believe that it's maybe one of the most powerful things of being a leader and creating a successful organization, because once you start to understand, again, people's background, stories, and what motivates them, that driven by empathy, right? Then all of a sudden you can identify how to lead.
Now, in our next clip, for those of you who have followed the seasons along, we had Chad Foster on. And Chad is not only a motivational speaker today and a really impactful and insightful consultant to a lot of Fortune 500 companies. Chad actually went blind, if you remember the episode, when he was just in his early 20s. Now, this was one of my most memorable episodes, simply because of what he's had to overcome and then his attitude about it today. And one of his keys for transformation is really choosing how you see the challenges in your life, not as obstacles, but opportunities. When you hear somebody who literally went blind talk about a new vision for his life and how that experience has shaped him, and how resilience and gratitude and emotional intelligence can turn even our darkest moments into the sources of light, it made me realize that I have no excuses. Like when I see someone do what he's done, I think it really puts things into perspective. So let's take a listen to how Chad can inspire us to think about our obstacles as opportunities in 2025.
So I went to get my first guide dog at 23 years old. Still kind of woe is me. Showed up on their campus there in Michigan with this woe is me mentality, very much the victim mentality. And I was there, and I'll never forget, I walk in and I'm feeling bad for myself and all this. And then there are people in my class who are also getting a seeing eye dog, and some of them had mental impairments. So they were mentally impaired and blind. And some of them were on dialysis. They had to go to dialysis every week because they had diabetes on top of being blind. And then there were these girls there. I'll never forget these girls, just incredible. They were deaf and blind, and they're getting a dog to be independent. And we had to just talk with an interpreter who would sign into their hands, and that was the only way that they could communicate. And so they were facing unimaginable challenges on a level that I couldn't even begin to contemplate. Yeah, imagine, if you will, like I grab a dog's harness handle and walk down the street in a busy highway, busy road, whatever. I can hear what's going on. They couldn't hear or see what's going on, but they're getting a dog so that they could be independent. And the living courage exuded by these brave souls just left me ashamed of my pathetic attitude. It completely flipped my mindset almost instantly on the spot, because I had been looking at everything that I had lacked in my life, and living with these people for 26 days flipped that entire perspective on its ear, because I realized that, you know what, I'd had all my hearing. I'd had all my mental and kidney function. I had 20 years of good, usable eyesight. It wasn't perfect, but it was a whole lot more than some people get. And so I started to focus on the things that I had instead of the things that I didn't have. And I learned that, a lot of times people think happiness, is some feeling that you get, it's some emotion that you experience. And I just don't think that's the case. I think it's a decision that you make every single day when you wake up. You either choose how you're going to look at things, or you allow random circumstances to affect your happiness. And so I learned at that experience, Leader Dogs for the Blind, that, it's not the happiness that leads to gratitude. It's the gratitude that leads to happiness.
Oh, wow.
So if you can really choose a perspective, anchor yourself in gratitude, pay attention to the things that you have, and have that mindfulness towards the things that we all very naturally take for granted as humans, it can shift your happiness level all based on your perspective and your gratitude. And so that's why at home with our kids, every night, actually, we all do a gratitude session. I make the kids and wife, we all do it at home. We have to say 3 unique things that we're thankful for that day, because my belief is that if we can bring the conscious attention to the very things that we take for granted every single day, then we can start to shift our set point for happiness and gratitude.
Well, that's amazing, and I love it. And we talk a lot about around the neuroscience research of the fact that the brain looks like, as far as we can tell from the research, that the brain can't be in a position of gratitude and in a position of anxiety at the same time. And so it literally changes the neurochemistry of the brain. So the things you're doing, you're helping literally rewire your kids' neural pathways by having them do that every night. So that's amazing. What would you say as we close here? What would you say to people that are listening that says, yeah, you know what, Jeff, Chad, this sounds great and I love it. But I don't have that kind of story. I didn't, I wasn't going blind from the time I was 3 and went blind at 21. And, I don't have that. And even, I tell my story all the time, coming from the farm and overcoming cancer and being the first person, I keep telling people everybody's story matters. And don't think that what you think is insignificant isn't completely significant to somebody else. What advice would you give to people? You've been talking to people now by the hundreds of thousands around the world the last several years. What consistency have you heard that you have to continue to encourage other people with because they just get stuck in their own, my story doesn't really matter? But you know what I mean?
Well, I think the most important story for you is the story that you're telling yourself about you. And so if you're telling yourself that your story doesn't matter, then that will become true. But if you're telling yourself a better story about your story and about your circumstances and about your ability to navigate a situation, that can be true too. I sat around for some time just telling myself that I went blind because I've got terrible luck and woe is me. But then I learned to start telling myself better stories that I went blind because maybe I'm one of the few people on the planet who has the strength and the toughness to overcome that and use it to help other people. Now, technically, both of those stories can be true,
right?
But one story paints me as a victim. But the second story, the better story, is a Jedi mind trick that transforms my disability into my strength. So every one of us will become our stories. The stories that you tell yourself about yourself are the single most important factor to determining your success, your happiness, and the meaning that you're attaching to your circumstances. You will become your stories. The biggest influence in your life is you. So make sure you choose your stories wisely.
So in our next clip, we had a little thunder from down under. Aye, crikey, we had Trav Bell on, the bucket list guy, and he's just such a motivational person, not just who he is as a human, but his story and his backstory and how he kind of became known as this bucket list guy and inspiring people to think about the things that we really want to do in our life. And we're only here for a short time, and how we can align our vision with action. His concept of the bucket list really allows us how to live with purpose and transform not just our lives, because our lives are important, obviously, but really, how do we transform the lives of those around us? So let's listen to Trav and take a little bit of motivation for our own bucket list into the next year.
So our job, my mission, if you will, is to wake people up, disrupt to a certain extent. We're only on here for 45 an hour, whatever, and so I've got to say some stuff to get you to wake up, stop just existing, start intentionally living, look, people are dying at 40 and being buried at 80.
It's good.
So people are just sleepwalking through their lives. We go outside and we see dead people. And here's the thing, like I say, a bucket list is a tangible life plan where your career plan or your business plan should fit into your life plan and not be the other way around.
Could you repeat that? Because I think that's so important. I want to make sure we underscore that.
A bucket list is a tangible life plan where your career plan or your business plan should fit into your life plan and not be the other way around. So it really brings home this work to live principle, right? And so when I speak to, business owners out there and anyone climbing the corporate ladder, let's just compartmentalize what we do on a day-to-day basis, whether it be a job or a business, a career. Our jobs, career, business is designed to do two things and two things only, and that is to produce time flow and cash flow when optimized, right? Cool. Double bonus though, if the thing that you do, the product or service that you put out there in the world helps people, I'm sure it does, and it ticks your values, like it lines with your values, then I think that's the holy grail, right? It's giving you the time flow and the cash flow for you, and it's ticking you, and it's giving you a sense of purpose and meaning. Double bonus. And here's the thing: the sad reality in this day and age, and this might be a line in the sand for some people while you're watching and listening to this, is like maybe some coming up to the end of the year, it's maybe reevaluation time about what we're doing here.
That's right.
And it's a really good time to recalibrate. And these are great tools because in America, 89%, check this out, 89% of people who go to work every day in America are what they call disengaged. So that means nearly 9 out of 10 people go to work, get the paycheck, come home, really couldn't care less. A lot of people, in my opinion, live their life reactively, not proactively. Plus your bucket list, let's check this out. So in the book, I go through this concept of a reverse bucket list as well as a future bucket list. There's actually 3 lists. There's a chapter 26, I think. We've got a reverse bucket list. Now, guys, a reverse bucket list is a big gratitude exercise. It's really, if you haven't got a bucket list written, here's where you start. You start with your reverse bucket list. Your reverse bucket list is everything you've done in your life as if it were on a bucket list all the way along. Claim that stuff. We've got a mental health perfect storm. We've got to do something about it. So let's get happy now. What's wrong with that? And if you start crossing off or ticking off a lot of the things on your bucket list, the most immediate, doable, low-hanging fruit right now, that will give you the momentum and motivation to smash through the bigger ones. It really will. It's about choosing happiness. So, by the way, this is not just about the ticks off your bucket list. It's really about how you reverse engineer every aspect of your life in order to make this stuff come to fruition. It's about the growth of you on this journey towards these self-imposed destinations. But more importantly, here's the key takeaway. More importantly, it's about the person that exists on the other side, and that is the person that you do not know yet. That's your potential. Get curiously excited about the bigger version of you, push the envelope, take those challenges, do more adventures. Life's way too short not to.
All right, so our last clip, we're going to circle back to the good doctor, Dr. Richard Boyatzis, and we're going to bookend it with him because I think it's so important for us to think about just how important this emotional intelligence concept and intentional change is in our lives. And he's got a few more additional nuggets I think that you're really going to appreciate as you can put them into your toolbox for next year and beyond. Let's take a listen. And I think, and I'd love for you to kind of summarize all this for us and then give us some practical tools and tips here. But I feel like you just mentioned some folks we call innovators. You could look at throughout history at a handful of folks who did the same thing. I feel like we're all capable of that, but we're fighting our own biology, physiology, and psychology with all the things that you attributed to. So knowing that we're fighting that, which is why there's an 11% improvement in those who do leadership development and training and coaching, what can be done and what should be done to improve that?
Right. Well, the first thing is to recognize the science and to say, okay, if vision, purpose is the driver of sustained change, then shouldn't we be talking about that and reminding ourselves of our purpose on a regular basis? So, concrete. I think every manager or executive or leader who has a staff meeting or a project meeting should begin each meeting with some discussion of their purpose, not their goals, their purpose. Why are we doing this? So it could be 5 minutes, could be 6 minutes, something about the values, something about a positive story of a client or a customer that was helped, some way to get at the thing that says to people, we're not here to make budget, we're here to help people. We're here to create new products. We're here to make sure that everybody's got comfortable, safe shoes. Purpose, vision. That's key. So it's not just coming up with it, which, by the way, is not the responsibility of the head person. It has to come from everybody if it's going to be truly inspirational. But reminding people of it on a regular basis. So you start with a discussion of it. You tell stories about customers that were really happy or satisfied. You highlight people who have been heroes in innovation. These are a bunch of things you can do. And if you kick off every meeting with 5 to 8 minutes of that, the rest of your hour is going to go a lot more effectively when you do look at variances.
And I think you're probably going to get into that. You probably get into this in your book, but by doing that, you're suppressing, if I'm not mistaken, you're suppressing the analytical network, yes, and then you're activating the emotional empathic network, and you're elevating the right neurochemistry to be in order for us not only to be inspired, but willing to be innovative.
Yeah. So then when you go into the budget variance, or why did we have this problem with losing sales to this competitor, and you have to go into the analytic mode, you actually start into the analytic mode open.
Yes.
So your problem identification, your problem solving will be a lot better. So that's one thing.
Okay.
Second, really effective leaders understand that leadership is not something a person does. It's a relationship. You can't be a leader without followers, kind of a definition. And just because people report to you does not mean they're following you. I mean, they might be spitting in your coffee that they bring to you. You just don't know.
Right.
So the issue for people in leadership positions, whether it's the head of an organization or project team or a family, is how do you build the relationships? Well, it has to involve talking, not exchanging texts, talking. And then it's not talking about problems, it's talking about what's funny, what's going well, what's intriguing, what's puzzling, what's worrying. So I think what our studies to date have shown is that working vision and purpose and working the quality of the relationships are the two levers that people have to make the discussions more creative and healthier.
Now, as we close out 2024, and as I close out 2024 as your humble host, there's a couple exciting things I want to share with you. Number one, just got released recently, is a book that we wrote called Inspired by a True Story, where we've taken 12 really, really just motivational and inspirational guests from seasons past and compiled their story into 12 chapters of a book called Inspired by a True Story. And the whole purpose of this book is for you to read it through the lens of not their story, but your own. And it's available now in Amazon and all the bookstores. You might go find a book. So go jump on there and get Inspired by a True Story. And I think you'll if you remember the episodes, you'll really reconnect with the guest at a new level. And if you haven't even listened to the episode, just reading their story will inspire you for next year and beyond. And then lastly, I think what I'm excited about is one of our last episodes this year. Dr. Dan Doherty, our Chief Coaching Officer and President here at Braintrust, and I are going to sit down in studio and not just do a year-end review, but we're going to talk about everything that we've learned this past year through the eyes of our clients and the world that we've learned in leadership and emotional intelligence, and really dive into the concept of NeuroCoaching, the platform that we've been teaching a lot of our clients with over the past couple of years. And NeuroCoaching, the book, is going to launch early next year as well. So don't miss that episode because it's going to be coming up very soon as well. And again, as always, we are honored to have you on as members of the Braintrust family as we go through podcast episodes. If you've got someone in mind that you think would be an excellent guest for the Driving Change podcast, please send us in that person and how to contact them. And we'd love to potentially have them on the show in next season. So until then, we'll see you next time.